Chapter 21. Rexion. Amarok, Chenerah's friend, lover, protagonist, he was dead. So was Joliot and many other wolves and foxes. They were all irretrievably lost. The war had claimed countless victims. Victims that Chenerah had sent all to their doom. He regretted it, again and again. But the fact was that all the events could not be changed. That was now 16 years ago, past, also irretrievable. The shepherd dog was now 48 years old, and you could see it in his face. The fur of his muzzle was now grayed, some whiskers white, the eyelids looked tired, and every day the gray hairs in his fur coat became more. He was still very strong, but his gait was a bit stiffer than before, and he wagged his tail less often than usual. Chenerah sat in his kitchen at the dining table and looked out the window into the small garden. It was autumn, and so the small trees bore colorful foliage. A light breeze blew some of them onto the lawn, whose blades of grass, damp with rain, yielded to the wind chime. The dog was thoughtful. What had brought all this? The great showdown, which he had only barely survived, had changed many things. Humans were now decimated, their kin countable. Thus, the joint government of Arimaria, consisting of foxes and wolves, decreed that Gajans had to register. Those who did not follow were imprisoned, and it was at the discretion of the authorities which of them could stay or settle where. The empire of the foxes was no longer called Arimaria, but Republic of Aram Samojedin area since a few years. What a name! It included the winner of the Long War. Although there was still a body of politicians, scientists and aristocrats, which was allowed to decide the fate of the country, it was not sovereign. Everything had to be done in agreement with the monarchy of Samojija, which now had a new, young king. Rexion was the child born of Serena's rape of Amarok. He was now 16 years old and ascended the throne at the age of 14. Serena, who still held the reins firmly in her hands as queen regent, prepared her son to lead her nation on his own in the near future. Chenerah had never met him, but had heard that he must be a very good-natured and patient wolf. The shepherd dog was not interested in world politics, because he had already fulfilled his task many years ago. He and his fellow wolves had devastatingly defeated the Gajans. With Amarok's death, the Aramarans felt satisfaction, surrendered, and thus limited damage. Peace had returned to Alpha. Vul. Truth in silence. Dialogue after the dispute. Respect for each other. One could not speak of a friendship of nations, but all parties involved had agreed with the outcome of the fighting. The male still remembered it clearly. His people remained in Alsatia, and he himself watched over the Ispasetka, because he no longer trusted the leader of his tribe. "Oh dear, so much mail again," spoke the Kesar as he opened the mailbox and was met by a large load of writing. Very often, even after all these years, he received letters of thanks from various corners of the three empires involved in the war. Many revered him, thanked him for his service. Sometimes, even females wrote to him, proposed marriage, and enclosed obscene pictures with their love letters. Didn't they know that he? In the meantime, he had gotten into the habit of sorting out the obvious envelopes without opening them. This writing, the ensnaring and licking of some anthros, was getting on his nerves by now. What else did they want from him? He did what he had to do then, that was all. That was nothing he was proud of or imagined. Besides, he had not fought alone. Who paid homage to the deceased nowadays, except on specially designated memorial days? Finally, only a few letters remained, and besides a few advertising and official letters, one envelope in particular caught the male's eye. The address of the aged dog, who now lived permanently in Alsatia, was printed in gold letters of his native language, and a border of the same color adorned the paper. He looked curious as he slowly opened the envelope, almost knocking over his cup of coffee in the process. He took out a noble-looking letterhead, written in Alsatian in neat, beautiful handwriting. On it shone the flag of the royal house of Samojija, a blue background against which the silhouettes of three male feral wolves in different colors were placed. Their two-dimensional bodies were decorated by a cross, a heart, and an anchor. Next to each pictogram could be read a Latin word, fidem, amare, sp. They meant faith, love, and hope. Looking at the flag, Gajaze pondered and sighed. It was he who had thought up the wolf's emblem of dominion as the flag of their nation when he had started writing his book many years ago. Now that he was no longer the ruler of everything, not knowing when the story of the foxes, wolves and dogs would end, it seemed strange to him to have his own creation, this logo, in front of him. It also seemed strange to him that he was now no longer the omniscient narrator, but had to shape his life like everyone else, in uncertainty about the future. His thoughts ended and intently he read what someone had written to him in squiggly handwriting. Dear Kesar, honored sovereign of the Alsatian Empire. This is not a love letter, a declaration of friendship or a song of praise to you. You are reading an invitation to get to know each other. I would like to thank you personally for your service to our nations, to our entire world. This has not happened yet, which I truly regret. It has taken me a few years to understand what you have done and what all this means for all our lives. You knew my father, Amarok. Unfortunately, I cannot say that about myself. Therefore, I would like to ask you to tell me about him and his time with you at a meeting. This is an invitation, a request, not a command. But I would be very pleased if you would accept this offer and let me know when and where we can meet in a friendly way. This has been discussed with my mother, the Queen Regent. She has expressly agreed, even advocated, a meeting between us. I hope you will honor me soon, for I am sure you will have much to tell me, just as I will have many questions for you. In esteem, respect and curiosity about who you are. This paper was signed by none other than the King of Samojija, Rexion. Immediately the dog noticed that the monarch must have discarded the etiquette of the court, according to which one always spoke of oneself in the pluralis majestatis. He was also surprised by the ease with which Rexion had written. He offered him a conversation, was curious and grateful at the same time. Even though Chenerah was not politically involved, he had appropriate respect for the wolfish monarchy. They were each other's neighbors, the nations of Samojija and Alsatiania were closely connected. So why should it not be that he accepted this invitation and, in turn, drafted a terse letter announcing his coming? Surely he had many things to tell his former friend's son about his father. Also, some things would become uncomfortable. However, Gajaze knew that it was also part of the young monarch's growing up that he needed to know the whole truth about everything he had questions about. Talking to the young wolf would also help him come to terms with the past, put everything to rest, and regain inner peace. When Chenerah arrived in Luna, he looked around. All the damage that the war had inflicted on this city had been repaired. He had not been here for a long time. It would never have occurred to him that this place could ever have looked any different. Luna was neat, orderly, and prepared. Everything was as it had always been. Just as the Wolf Queen wanted to see this place. In the meantime, the tarred streets that the Gajan had laid out, had been removed again. Many things were dismantled, some had been integrated into the cityscape, as long as it seemed useful to the Queen. Here it was wolfish again, free of people. In contrast to Arimaria, Samojija, like the neighboring country of Alsatiania, tolerated no earthlings on its soil. All the humans who had survived the battle, there had to be about 3,000, were now in the Fox Empire, almost exclusively in the west. They were defeated and under control. Soon, the news said, their deportation back to Gaja would begin. Before the end of the year, Alpha Vol would be completely free of earthlings. Arriving at the palace, Chenerah was now standing in front of the garden gate. A servant looked snobbishly through his glass box and asked hoarsely, "Yes, please?" "I am Chenerah Gajaze and I have to speak with His Majesty the King." "I am announced." "Please wait. We need to check this," the wolf said, typing away on a keyboard. After a moment, he said, "Very well, Lord Sovereign. Good day to you," and allowed the dog to enter through the gate. "Lord Sovereign my ass, wolf," grumbled Chenerah crossly, but this did not impress the guard commander. Gajaze opened the door to the great hall and looked at the empty throne. Rexion and Serena were a little late, he thought, but used the time to look around. "Everything is still as I wrote it down. Fascinating," he spoke quietly to himself, looking at the pictures of the heirs to the throne from times past. Suddenly, a youthful male voice broke the silence. "Ah, there you are." The dog was startled and turned around. He looked into the face of a young wolf who was now standing in front of him. Eyes wide open, he stammered, "Why, you're Rexion? The Rexion? Amarok's son?" The wolf grinned. It was impossible, but for a moment the Alsatian felt he was looking directly into the face of Amarok, his friend. Rexion was the same age when Amarok's story began, and he looked uncannily like him. "What's the matter with you?" asked the amused one when the elder did not close the catch again. You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you all right? It's nothing, Your Majesty. Forgive me, the dog spoke, whereupon the smiling young wolf offered to follow him with a gesture of his hand and a slight bow. Come on, Kesar, let's go for a walk in the garden. With pleasure, Your Majesty. When they arrived at the garden, Chenerah noticed its size, and that there were many shrubs and flying insects. It was windless, only slightly cloudy, a beautiful autumn day. My mother sends her regards, Chenerah. I'm afraid she couldn't wait. The Aramarans and we are negotiating in many different corners. Yeremia desires sole rule over her realm, but we want to ensure that Aramaria continues on the path toward meritocracy and does not become a dictatorship once again. You know, politics never sleeps. A meritocracy? The elder asked. I assumed that Aramaria would one day become a democracy. For 2 years already, it has been calling itself meritocratic. There may still be a long way to go to complete transformation, but we are working to ensure that in the future there will be a form of government there that can be called independent and reasonable. Therefore, the merits of the individual should also count, no longer a birthright or martial strength. Opportunities, we wish, should be equal for all, and rewards should be given to those who truly deserve it. The dog grinned and agreed, yes, I understand. I sincerely hope that Yeremia will also come to terms with this idea. There are many duties as a region of one state, which must now provide for another in addition. Didn't you want to accompany your mother? After all, Samojija will soon be your country. Oh, you know, these things are always so troublesome, the king rebuffed, making a dismissive gesture with his hand as he walked, and besides, the foxes are always annoying with their demands. I don't mind that they don't want to give up their pride, but still, sometimes they go quite overboard. You know them. I believe that their empire can become a true meritocracy before the end of this decade and get a new addition to its name, if everyone joins in, that is. Then we should have officially established the first meritocratic republic on Alpha. Vol. The dog nodded thoughtfully and then asked, how is it that you don't speak in the pluralis majestatis like your mother, Your Majesty? I noticed it in your letter, so I thought I would ask you about it. Rexion assigned the elder a seat on a wooden bench and sat down as well. He let his gaze wander and leaned back, relaxed. My mother taught me that it makes sense to show respect to strangers and friends. However, I don't want to address myself as I would a stranger or friend. That wouldn't be me. I'm not a we, I'm just a me. It may bend tradition a bit, but it does not break it. I would also like to offer you the you. I am Rexion, not Your Majesty, not to you, who are a hero and, moreover, an Alsatian, not one of my subjects. This attitude and the offer that followed visibly surprised the person in question. Perplexed, he nodded and asked that the Wolf King also address him by his first name. So it's a deal, then, the wolf rejoiced, adding that politics would work that way, too. So, Chenerah, tell me who my father was. What was he like? He then asked. The dog sighed and pondered. Where should he start? My mother has already told me many things, about everything that happened years ago. She met my father here, in this castle, gave him honorary citizenship. Later, he helped her get into the bunker below the leader's headquarters in Bolmare. Oh, what am I talking about, you know all this anyway. After all, you are the architect. Or rather, you used to be. Rexion. If you know about it, if Serena told you all this, then surely you know that your father and I. And how we once parted, the shepherd stammered, lowering his head. But, unlike expected, the young wolf remained very calm and composed, he shrugged his shoulders and only uttered a questioning and. But Rexion. That all this happened is my fault. I wrote this story. I mean, me as a human being on Gaja. It is very complicated, but I am responsible for everything bad in this world. So, as well as his death. I'm sorry, I really am, the shepherd apologized and his eyes became moist. Chenerah, whatever happened, I know that the Gajan snatched control of our world from you. Everything that happened after that is not your fault. The thing is, if my mother hadn't had sex with my father, I wouldn't be here. That may be, Gajaze agreed, but it's also true that it was rape and that Amarok had no intention of becoming a father. She wouldn't have told you that, would she? Sure she did. She can't explain it, but I assume that she was directed by Gajaze's spirit. Because I also know that she killed her and that the goddess went into her. I'm surprised how easy it is for you to deal with all of this. In fact, you should hate me. Everything I wrote down at some point led to Amarok's death. It would seem understandable to me if you had something like sheer hatred in you. The younger one sighed and looked at a petal lying on the ground. They were silent for a while, after which the king asked his counterpart, "Are you joking? I have hated you for a very long time. I swore I would have you executed if I ever met you in person." The Alsatian gulped. "Yet," the king continued, "I could not. After I understood all this, there was no longer any reason to be angry. My father was angry. I can understand his reaction, too. But that's how the actions ultimately led to me existing. Now, at some point, it is up to me to lead this realm. And I do not intend to become a despot or begin my reign by assassinating an old friend of my nation." Again he smiled. Chenerah, however, could not believe it. This wolf, visually so similar to Amarok, was quite different from the latter. He was understanding, calm, and did not seem to feel hatred in the slightest. Surely he would become a great, righteous king whom the people loved. "I don't even know how to answer that, Rexion," he admitted. "I had assumed you were angry, filled with hatred, and bent on revenge. But that doesn't seem to be the case. How is it that you are so different?" The monarch stood up and Chenerah did the same. Again, they walked a little and were silent for a moment. All the while, Gajaze looked sheepishly at the ground, which his companion noticed and suddenly put his hand on his shoulder. "All is well," he said, punctuated by a surprised look from the dog. "Isn't it everyone's wish that future generations learn from the mistakes of their predecessors and become more understanding so they don't happen again?" Now the Alsatian also smiled and raised his head again. "You are absolutely right. I have made mistakes. We all have, somehow. Some things went wrong, or intended differently. These things just happened and can't be changed. Then we should all learn from them so that they don't happen again. They say that history happens again and again in a similar form. But if we are strong enough, work on ourselves, then we can make sure it doesn't. We break the cycle." The males strolled back to the castle and Rexion spoke to one of his servants. "The Lord Sovereign and I are going out. Please see that the Queen is informed that it will probably be late." "Of course, Your Majesty." The shepherd dog was pleasantly surprised when the king smiled at him and said, "Come, Chenerah. Let's go have a drink and talk about your troubled history and all of our futures. I'll show you how wolves really party." "Very well, Rexion," he received back approvingly from his counterpart, and so they walked toward downtown. Meanwhile, the young monarch asked the dog soldier about Amarok, saying that he was also a hero for him. He wanted to know everything about him, what he liked, what his characteristics were, his relationship with Chenerah. "I'm sorry, but I have to pester you. After all, I also want to understand why I'm the way I am." The Alsatian spoke calmly, "That's all right. Enlightenment about history should be important for each of us. Your father was a brave wolf who wanted to hand himself over just to let the strife of nations end. An inner anger stirred in him when he had to admit that Amarok's plan failed, however, because Ardos, then his best friend and brother in spirit, supported the dastardly plan of the leader and Yeremia, who let Amarok walk into a trap. Ardos was my last casualty of this war, after all," he grumbled, catching sight of one of the king's fangs. He understood immediately, but wanted to know what had happened right after his father's death. "Let's have a drink first, Rexion. I think after a glass or two of Capaci my tongue will loosen up and I'll find it easier." The wolf nodded in agreement. In a marketplace, a few paces away, Chenerah saw a statue whose posture struck him as unusual. "Rexion, I'd like to take a look at that, if that's all right," he spoke, walking towards it, spellbound. "Of course," spoke the wolf and followed. Standing in front of the supposed statue, the Alsatian recognized the face of the former leader of Arimaria. "Is that?" He began his question, but was interrupted by his companion. "Yes, that's Radovan Carteron, right. He looks so real," the older man remarked. "That's because he is, my friend." "What, really?" Gajaze unlocked the catch and remembered the last images described in the first third of Vulpes Lupus Canis. The lifeless body of the despot was recovered by soldiers from the central tower in Bolmare, as a trophy, as one could read in the story. You preserved it and put it here? The shepherd asked, revealing bewilderment. Rexion looked thoughtfully up at the fixed body standing on a pedestal and reflected, yes, this man has killed thousands of Samoyedans, done heinous things. He has my father's friend, Joliad, on his conscience, as well as himself, though not directly. I did write down myself that Samoyedans took Radovan, but I did not think of ever seeing him again. For me, that was done, Chenerah explained. Don't you think that's a little distasteful yourself? He's dead. Don't you want to let him rest in peace? The king's tone became more serious as he did not look at his interlocutor, but still looked up. I know what you are thinking, Chenerah. How can such a nice guy be so cruel and display his former enemy like a trophy? Rexion, I didn't mean that. No, it's all right. I'll be happy to explain. This fox does not deserve peace. We wolves, and by that I mean my people and myself, will never forget what he has done, never forgive him. He shall serve as a warning to the foxes, so that they will never start another war with us. It is also to encourage my people to stand up whenever there is oppression and torment. In order for history not to endlessly go around in circles of repetition, it needs continual exhortation. They then walked on, with the sovereign agreeing with the Wolf King. I understand that this is important to you, that it is important to your people. I might not have presented it that way, but if it is everyone's wish to be admonished, then so be it. Well, I was just a little surprised. That is all. It's not a condemnation and it's not meant to spoil our evening to come. Let's change the subject and just celebrate, okay? The wolf nodded, and so after a short while they found themselves in front of a bar from which music, laughter and voices came. They sat down at the counter and Rexion explained to Gajaze that everything that would be incurred that evening would be on the royal house's account. Eat and drink whatever you like. Take plenty, because we certainly won't get together again this young. Ha, me and young. The dog rebuffed. Well, you've done all right, spoke the king, winking with a smile. Also smiling, the dog nodded gently and turned to the bartender. The bartender had previously bowed to his regent and took the hand signal of the Kesar as an opportunity to put 2 glasses and a bottle. The music that surrounded them was lively, joyful and consisted mainly of flute, violins and drums. The guests here were equally cheerful, which Gajaze took to mean that the war must already be almost forgotten. They were all peaceful, amused and relaxed, drinking beer and wine. The drink, which had always characterized the Vulpes Lupus Canis, was also not to be missed here. This year the copachecas taste extremely sweet, as you are about to discover, Chenerah, Rexion spoke, almost having to shout as the music threatened to choke his calm voice. Oh yeah? The sheepdog grinned mischievously. A little more alcohol, then, to keep the sweetness from taking over, right? He nodded to the bartender, who pulled another bottle from under the counter and set it in front of them. A little hooch and a lot more capaci, please. The regent spoke, and Gajaze filled their glasses with the mixture. They raised their goblets, with Rexion following Samoyeden custom and offering a toast. Here's to you, Chenerah. To the liberation of our world from man and war. To us and a fine and educational evening. The canine sovereign also raised his glass, nodded in agreement, and added that he was glad to have accepted the king's invitation. It's good that you have dissolved my solitary status with your desire for a meeting. After all, you are nicer than I had assumed. Here's to us in this evening, then. Immediately they finished their glasses in one go, which reminded the elder of a moment from his past. Many years ago he had saved Amarok's life and revealed to him the truth about his world. Back then, too, he faced a young wolf. However, the situation was different. His friend was devastated, had just killed the Aramaran tyrant, and had also lost his childhood sweetheart Joliad to him. The males drank, laughed and talked about each other. Rexion had not spent as many years as Chenerah on Alpha Vol, but could tell very amusing, but sometimes also thoughtful, philosophical things. As life played out, as fate would have it, Gajaze now spent the evening with the son of one of his protagonists. And he gave the dog the impression that his personality was an overlap of Amarok's and Joliad's. Rexion was very educated, polite, seemed honest and understanding. He was curious and inquisitive, knew good nature and sincerity. Chenerah was secretly excited about him, about what he would one day mean for the kingdom of Samojija. The wolves, should his personality not change too much, would love him. The people loved their present queen, Chenerah, there was no doubt about that. But as soon as the young wolf ruled alone, they would even worship him. With a loosened tongue, the Caesar then spoke, "You are a good one, oh yes." "No," said the king, "only what you once made of me. The good has come from your spirit." Restrictively, his crony agreed, "Yes, but from the mind of a Gajan who doesn't care about his friends and role models." The shepherd felt the alcohol and imagined, even Rexion noticed, that the copache was having an effect, which was amplified by the additional booze. In fact, Chenerah didn't tolerate as much as he used to. The young wolf was not used to alcohol anyway and had to search for the right words more and more often. After they had continued talking for a while, their reason, restraint and seriousness turned into a drinking contest. Under the eyes of the guests sitting next to them, they tipped a few glasses into themselves one after the other and ordered 3 new bottles. However, the evening did not threaten to tip in its basic mood, but merely to become long. "Chenerah, dog!" exclaimed Rexion, hugging the elder, whereupon a few guests turned to him and chuckled softly. "Yes," replied the addressed one, happily slurring his words and returning the embrace. "I am a dog, a mutt, you wolf." His wolfishness. "Ah, your wolfishness." Then Rexion had to laugh, loosened the embrace and shook himself amused, "His wolfishness. Ha ha. For all I've been told. That hasn't been there yet." Chenerah also laughed and they both briskly emptied their glasses again. Later, when the mood in the bar was even surpassed, it culminated in some of the drinkers moving chairs aside and starting to dance. Many of them clapped to fast drum rhythms and celebrated while howling again and again as if they were feral, primal wolves. Yes, copache even today always led to the fact that its drinkers gained knowledge, but forgot it again at the moment of drinking, because of its alcohol content. Today this brew was flowing in streams, in which Chenerah and Rexion had a great share and were happy to dance with the other Samoyedans. Soon the pub had to close and in a slight stupor, King Samojaja, like a normal citizen, paid his bill and the Anthros headed home. "If you like, you can stay with me and sleep it off," Chenerah, the wolf offered, but the sheepdog declined with thanks. He said that he already found his way home, not that drunk at all, but still, "Thank you for this great evening, Rexion. It was very funny. I haven't laughed so heartily in a very long time." "Too bad," the king regretted, "but I can't force you, can I? Or should I?" He grinned, which his counterpart did likewise. "Maybe." For one last drink, Chenerah then suddenly changed his mind. So they went back to the palace, where they were greeted by a servant. "My king, there you are. Your mother has already gone to sleep. She said you would talk to each other tomorrow." "It's fine, thank you. The Lord Sovereign is staying here today. We'll make ourselves comfortable and have another drink." "Very well." The other wolf nodded and bowed. "Ah," remarked the Caesar, "so I'm staying here today. I see. I thought I'd just come in for one last drink." "Well," Rexion spoke up, "I didn't mention how big the glasses we were drinking from would be." Once again, he winked mischievously at the elder, a gesture that made him seem very sympathetic in the eyes of the Alsatian. The males walked up a wide, stone staircase and came into a large room flooded with cozy-looking, inviting light. "Nice place you have here," the dog praised and looked around. There were many paintings of past times, palaces, pomp, nobles, nature and still life. They were things that one remembered fondly. After all, Samojaja, just like Arimaria, had a troubled past. All the centuries had passed, knowledge was lost. What people seemed to remember fondly, however, was the fact that there had always been heroes, people who could write history because they were victorious. "Would you like some more copache, perhaps, or would you have some wine, Chenerah?" the king asked, holding curved glasses in his hands. The looking dog slowly wandered along the walls of the room, studying their intricately detailed plaster, and turned around. "Copache is perfectly fine." He nodded as the wolf offered him a seat on his opulent sofa. "Well, I guess one glass won't hurt. But after that it should be over. I'm already noticing a decent spin, to be honest," the older man admitted and sat down. Rexion agreed and filled the glasses. "Tell me, what happened after my father's death?" he asked. You certainly took up the pursuit of Ardos, didn't you? The Kesar sighed. Yes, that's right. After I buried Amarok, I ran after him. I couldn't believe that he must have watched your father, my friend, being tortured. I knew immediately that something was wrong. Ardos did not intervene, which in my eyes made him complicit in this cruelty. Rexion looked sad, but was still curious. He also sighed and wiped his eyes. Hearing his father's name made him feel down, angry. All these years he had lived without a male idol, and now he wondered if he hadn't unknowingly invited the sheepdog because of it. He needed guidance. Different guidance than his mother was giving him. She could teach him to run an entire empire, to make policy, to make wise decisions. But wasn't it also important for a young male to learn what struggle meant? Taking another sip, he asked, "Will you tell me what happened?" A slight smile from the dog followed, as he was pleased that there was now someone to whom he could tell his story from the last few years. He had the feeling with his counterpart that he could trust him. A great, sincere curiosity met him here. When I ran after Ardos, I knew he wanted to return to Alsatiania. Immediately I suspected that our leader dog was in cahoots with him. I didn't know if the humans had been hired by either of them, but I didn't care. With a quick stride, fists clenched and lips raised, Chenerah ran snorting across the fields and meadows. He felt a boiling rage within him and quivered as he vowed to punish Ardos with destruction if he caught up with him. The dog ignored paths and roads on his way. They did not exist. He overcame fences by climbing and jumping. There were no obstacles. There was only the direct way to Alsatiania. Ketharin, the small village where he had grown up, the place where the leader of the tribe stayed, that was his destination, where he would unload all his anger. Ardos and the old woman would be confronted and then atone for having betrayed, tortured and left Amarok to die. The journey took a while and eventually he had to use fast trains within Arimaria. It was difficult for him to behave quietly and unobtrusively so as not to run into problems, because he would have preferred to turn everything and everyone into ashes. The train route ended at the Alsatian border and that meant Chenerah had to walk the rest of the way to the village. While leaving paw prints on the sandy ground and running non-stop, he suddenly stopped because he almost stepped on a green glowing beetle. "Whoa, stop. Well, who are you?" He spoke and bent down to have a closer look at the creature. He suddenly became calm, relaxed and balanced inside. There was no more anger in him and this beetle captivated him. The insect crawled slowly towards the edge of the path, not seeming to notice the supposed giant, who tilted his head to the side and was amazed to find that the animal was a scarab. "How is that possible? Something like you doesn't even exist here," he marveled, for he had never seen such a beetle. Chenerah did know what species it was. After all, he was in a sense Gajan by virtue of his connection to the architect, yet he did not recall ever writing about beetles at all in the Vulpes Lupus Canis, and certainly not one that could only exist on Gaja. "How you shine. And shine." When the animal reached the edge of the path and found cover under a stone, the glow disappeared. The sovereign raised his head and looked up to the sky. "What?" he asked. "What are you trying to tell me, huh?" His own voice whispered to him in his mind, "Just stay calm, Chenerah. Gather yourself." Irritated, the male decided to walk on. He was surprised to find that he now seemed to be calm himself. Although his plans had not changed, he wanted to approach everything objectively, reasonably and calmly. The encounter with the scarab was strange, but he couldn't make sense of it, and besides, he had more important things to do. When I arrived at the hut of our leader, I heard her talking with Ardos. The suspicion I had was confirmed. They were talking about Amarok's death, about how now there would be peace on Alpha Vol. The leader praised Ardos for hiring the Gajans. Although I listened to their conversation calmly, I could feel myself about to burst inside. The dog spoke, while Rexion sipped from his glass. "Did you?" "Yes," I rushed into the room, drew the sword and rammed it into his stomach. He was not prepared for that. Although I originally wanted to confront him, I lost my temper. It wouldn't have changed anything anyway if he had tried to explain himself. In retrospect, I regret somewhat that I didn't let him suffer longer, as I had actually planned. Besides the fact that those I had trusted had plotted, Ardos was my best friend. Of course, I also asked myself why he had betrayed me like that, but I could figure out for myself that he was devoted to our leader. He had always been very close to her and did what she asked. "Chenerah. The blind female dog exclaimed and jumped up. Artos had opened his eyes and was unable to resist. Reflexively, he grasped the blade stuck in his stomach and stared into the aggressive face of his crony. His hands turned red and the muscular conspirator's body trembled. "Che," he stammered, receiving a resounding slap. "Shut up!" The Kisar shouted and growled, grimly holding the sword. "You will bitterly regret it now. I thought you were my friend. How could I have been so wrong about you?" Artos moaned softly and blood ran from his fang. His eyes twisted and slowly he slumped down, after which his opponent pulled the weapon out of his body again, which now went to the ground. Finally, Gajaze kicked him several times with full force and yelled, "This is for Amarok." The last movements of the underdog abruptly ceased and the sovereign panted doggedly. Then he turned around in a flash and faced the leader dog, who was trembling all over, pleading, "Chenerah, please don't kill me. Please." Snorting, the male dog grabbed the neck of the old woman, who was now gasping and trying to loosen his grip. He squeezed, made the bitch gasp and looked strained when he suddenly let go of her. Coughing, the bitch fell to the ground, gasping for breath. "Please let me explain," she stammered. "No, I will not kill you. The mercy Artos received I gave him only because he was once a friend," the sovereign then spoke. "You I will make suffer for the rest of your miserable life. You will pay for betraying me and letting Amarok die." The old woman straightened up again and spoke hoarsely, "It had to be done, Chenerah. Understand? The war had to stop. It needed a sacrifice. Otherwise, the battle would have gone on forever. His life had to end so that our world could find peace. The Aramarans would have settled for nothing less." Her words did not matter to the Kisar. Whatever she might say, none of it would calm him, lessen her guilt, or be a justified objection. No syllable of what she said softened the anger of the male, who did not lower his chaps for a second. "I will take everything you have. And I will start with your voice. Do not see and do not speak. I'm curious to see if you can still be leader dog then, when nothing comes out of your mouth that is smart and wise," the shepherd dog threatened, looking at the female that she did not understand what he meant. Slowly he raised the blade, which the female dog didn't notice and only managed to get out a Kisar, "What are you doing?" A quick cut to her throat followed, at which she shouted out and tried to stop the incipient bleeding with her hand. The scream turned into a gurgle and the old woman fell to her knees. Now she crouched drawn beside Artos' body and wailed, with Chenerah looking at her deprecatingly and putting the sword back into its scabbard. "Don't worry, lead bitch," he said calmly, "the wound won't kill you. I won't make it that easy for you. I will take the protector and the Ispasetka. To you traitors I will not leave these things anymore. Traitors may be allowed to rule other realms, but not Alsatiania." Suddenly, two more males entered the hut. They had heard the scream and were now standing in front of the sovereign with drawn weapons. "By the gods!" one of them shouted. "What have you done, Kisar?" The one addressed replied, "If you don't want to be next, you'd better not stop me. Rather, take care of her. We don't want our great leader to die. Let me go, or you can whine with her about it." The warriors looked at each other in puzzlement for a moment, but let the Kisar have his way as he calmly put on the protector and took the Ispasetka, the sacred stone, from the shelf. Hastily, the soldiers took care of the female as its tormentor left the dwelling. "So you have hidden the Ispasetka, the focus of the world, at your home? So at the moment, no one but you and me know where it is?" The king interrupted the narration questioningly. The dog nodded silently. "But if that's the case, what other function does your leader have?" "Her job is to guard the insignia and sanctuaries of your people, if I remember correctly." "Now," grinned the sovereign, "she no longer has a function. That was the whole point. She can't see or speak now. I don't know if she's even alive after all these years. I have never been back to Ketharin since. I avenged the death of Amarok, and now I guard the Ispasetka myself. That bitch doesn't deserve it." The king pondered and asked whether the shepherd dog might not have done more harm than good. After all, Alsatiania had always been a loose confederation of different tribes, each of which needed a leader for spiritual guidance. Since no one now knew where the stone was, mistrust would be a likely result of all this. "No one needs a traitor as a leader. My tribe will continue to exist. Maybe they have had a new leader for some time. I don't care. In any case, they won't get the stone. It was all Alsatians together who successfully defended this peace. As a Caesar, it is my duty to override them all at any time when they are about to make stupid decisions. The wolf nodded. Yes, I see. Artos was your last victim of this war and the leader dog was punished. Why didn't they execute you for that? I am the Caesar. Period, the elder spoke confidently, and it was an answer that needed no further explanation. Absolutely, agreed Rexion, suggesting that the evening should now end. It is late. You are welcome to rest here or in the second bedroom, Chenerah. Let's talk more tomorrow. We are in dire need of sleep. They said goodbye with a hug, after which the males retired to their rooms. The next morning, the sheepdog realized that Rexion must have left the room early. He went to the dining room, where Chenerah and her son were already sitting and eating at the set table. Ah, there you are. I hope you had a pleasant night, the queen exclaimed joyfully, offering the dog a seat with a wave of her hand. Politely Rexion stood up, bowed and sat down again. Yes, the Alsatian confirmed and sat down as well. Our son told us about the visit to the inn. It is good that he can meet you. After all, you are a valued friend of the royal family. The dog briefly considered whether the Wolf Queen was sympathetic toward him. He was the one who had accepted Amarok's death from the beginning by writing his work. He sighed. Your Majesty, I know you must be angry with me. The regent interrupted him. It is well, Lord Caesar. For a long time, we and Rexion were truly enraged by the past events. In the meantime, however, we have understood that this architect, as you call him, took control of events away from you very early. So if anyone is to blame, it is him. Do not worry about it anymore. The important thing now is that there is life after the war. The dog nodded. You are certainly right, Your Majesty. I would like to undo many things, but that is no longer possible. I'm afraid that's true, the female confirmed, drinking from her goblet. Life holds many things that we would have liked to change in retrospect. But many things should be taken as experience and put aside. What is the use of sinking into grief or anger? That only narrows and clouds the view. Essential things would be forgotten, nothing important would be tackled anymore. Silence reigned for a few moments, with the three anthros eating breakfast and not glancing at each other. An oppressive feeling came over the sovereign, and just at the moment when he was about to say something to end the silence, the young wolf king beat him to it. Chenerah, I had an extremely strange dream last night that I must tell you about. It was about my father. The shepherd finished his chewing and gave Rexion a questioning look. The wolf male elaborated, I saw myself striding through Bolmare. The city was destroyed, the sky was grey, and not a soul was to be seen. Surrounded by the destruction, I walked into the large square where the headquarters of the Aramaran despot once stood. Soft thunder sounded and it began to rain. Suddenly I discovered a white statue standing there intact. It represented a fox, unclothed, posing on a pedestal. A golden plaque flashed and on it was read Per aspera ad astra. I raised my head, looked fascinated to the face of the statue and tilted my head slightly inquiringly when I realized that although this fox was confidently pointing to the sky, on the other hand, the representation of his hand did not match pointing, the index finger was not outstretched, but slightly curved. Whatever it was, something seemed strange about this posture and didn't quite fit with the rest of the scene. In the dream I felt that there must be some kind of secret. At times I even had the feeling that it wasn't me looking at this statue, but my father, looking through his eyes. It's really hard to put the feeling into words, but I think I should get some certainty about what this statue is about. Whatever this dream is trying to tell me, it has to do with my father. I'm sure of it. Chenerah gulped. Really? You dreamed that? Rexion nodded and admitted that it was a difficult dream to explain. Suddenly, countless images flashed in the dog's mind, containing scenes from times past. He saw Chenerah killing Arya and her spirit fleeing into the body of the she-wolf. Then he remembered that the glow of the goddess spirit was transmitted from Chenerah to Amarok while she was raping him. Later, when he gave his friend Amarok the coup de grace with the sword, he noticed that something luminous seemed to pass into it. Everything made sense. It was now clear. A big aha effect set in. Suddenly everything was simple. By the gods! The dog shouted and jumped up, pieces of his bun falling to the ground. That's it. Rexion looked in confusion into the Alsatian's wide eyes and asked, Are you all right? What's wrong? Yes, enlighten us, Chenerah. Let Rexion and us share in your brainwave, the monarch demanded. You are wise, Rexion, do you know that? The other only replied, however, which did nothing to brighten the wolf's thoughts. I don't understand? Then the Kesar seemed very excited, euphoric and relaxed. All his thoughtfulness turned into relaxation, joy and bliss. His heart was beating wildly and he started laughing loudly. It took a little while before he had tears in his eyes, hardly calmed down and sat down on the chair again. He folded his arms on the board, put his head inside and shouted, It's so simple. It's so simple. The wolf was visibly uncomfortable with the loud laughter. He looked around and asked, Chenerah, what's wrong with you? Did I say something wrong? Then, all of a sudden, the laughter died away. The dog stood up again in a flash, looked serious and stared at the wolf with widened eyes. The latter looked back in irritation as his guest breathed quickly. What wrong with you? Do you need a healer? What happened? What's wrong? Asked Rexion quietly, while his mother had her muzzle unlocked and wasn't moving. Now, the soldier began in a dark voice that no longer sounded joyful at all, I know what to do. And what exactly? The queen asked quietly, startled by the Kesar's behavior. The dog explained, Rexion, you told me that history happens again and again. But if we were strong enough, working on ourselves, we could make it not repeat. We could break the circle. Now I understand. Aria's spirit is currently in my sword. And the statue in Bulmer isn't just pointing at Gaja, it's made to hold the sword in its direction. Chenerah, the young king began, I don't understand what you are trying to tell me. The spirit of the primordial wolf is just waiting to come to Bulmer. Rexion, if you want to know exactly, it still stands, the statue. It is an ideal of the architect and cannot be destroyed by us in the war. True, it's good that it's still there, the king confirmed. But what's so funny about it? And what does any of this have to do with what we were talking about yesterday? You're still talking in riddles. But the Alsatian only spoke, Rexion, Serena. I must leave you. If I am right, all the suffering of your two peoples will never have existed. What do you mean? Asked the regent, puzzled. After all these years of searching for a solution, I think I have found it now. I have to go. Trust me. I believe, no I know, that I am right, Chenerah spoke, ran to Rexion and took him in his arms. The latter was even more confused than before, but said he could accompany his friend after all. But the dog waved him off, no, I'll go alone. You stay with your mother. I don't know if we will meet again. It must be so. Trust me, Rexion. The young wolf nodded, having understood that the Kesar and he would never meet again. Whatever it was that he was planning, this dog was the closest to the architect's thinking of all the beings on Alpha Vol and the only one who could understand his plans and actions. All right, Chenerah, Rexion spoke sadly, loosening the embrace. It was a brief acquaintance between us. Thank you for telling me about my father. It was nice. I don't understand what you plan to do now, but I trust you. The gods will have a destiny for you to follow. No one understands that better than I do. The soldier smiled fatherly as he said, Oh, Rexion, you are such a dear one. In everything I do, I will never forget you. This I promise. Your country could not have asked for a better king. Lord Kesar, the queen interjected, you might as well tell us what you are going to do now. Your appearance here was very confusing, and it still is. We demand an explanation. But he shook his head, No, your majesty. Surely I have put you through enough. You have understood much of what I have told you about the truth of this world. But I think that knowledge has limits. You would never understand what is about to come. Do not take it amiss, but that would be simply too much. Are you really saying that we are stupid right now? This is outrageous, Lord Kesar. Serena puffed up and put her hands on her hips, her son turning to her and defending Chenerah. Mother, let him. I trust Chenerah and so should you. He'll know what he's doing. If he doesn't want to say anything about it, then that will be fine. Don't you think so, after all you already know and have experience with him? If you say so, Then so be it. Can we assist you in any way, Kesar? No, I thank you, your majesty. The path is clear and I walk it without help. Do me the favor and take care of yourself and your son? I cannot wish for more. That is all I ask of you from my heart. She sighed and nodded. The young wolf hugged the dog again and had tears in his eyes. He spoke, "Take care of yourself, my friend," and gently stroked the back of the dog's head. "I will, Rexion. It will be a long journey, but it will provide peace of mind," Chenerah confirmed, ending the hug and wiping a tear from his muzzle. The queen and her scion bowed their heads in farewell and looked after the sovereign as he quickly left the dining room.